to talk about dealing with difficult people, and I want to contextualise it. Oh, wasn't that one, was it? So with the person next to you, I want you very briefly to describe a recent difficult encounter that you had. I'm not going to ask you to share them, so they can be personal if that works for you. Okay, 2 minutes for this, please. Bearing the example in mind, whether you had a chance to share or whether you just heard one, I want you to consider these questions. Okay? And I want you to consider these. Okay, so let's go back to these. Let's look at the second one. Did the other party have a valid point to make? Show of hands, yes? They did? No, they didn't. Maybe they did, and maybe they didn't. This is your judgment. Did you manage to get your view across to the other party? Hands up if yes. Hands up if no. Hands up if I don't care. All right. How did you feel at the end? Throw a couple of adjectives at me. Exhausted, pissed off, irritated, stressed, frustrated. Is there anything you would do differently the next time? The option of not talk to this person is not available. Okay. All right. I include the last one here for your consideration because I think for a lot of us as teachers who've become managers, we reflect a lot on our teaching. Whether we're good at it or not is another talk to give. That's something I'm very interested in, is how good are people at reflecting? And even though we take it as a given in our training courses and in our observation, etc., and we throw it around like, salt when we're cooking, I'm very interested in how good people are at reflection, how we help people get good. I think we think about this a lot when we're teaching. I think when we're managing, we don't necessarily implement the same process of reflection in terms of encounters, because we don't. And why? You will all say to me, because I don't have time. Because I'm fighting fires all the time, because I don't have time to do it. But this idea of reflecting on your management interactions in the same way as you reflect on your teaching interactions is potentially very, very powerful, I think. What do I want this session to do? I want this session to look at dealing with difficult people without them dealing with you. So let's, because we're in a closed room and, what happens on location stays on location, guys. Let's get some adjectives to describe the difficult person your encounter was with. So how would you describe that person? If I said to you, difficult people are, that difficult person is what? Say again, sorry? Stubborn? Arrogant? Confrontational? Ignorant? Manipulative? Boy, you love these people. Evasive? Unbalanced, delusional? Needs to change their medication? All right. Here are some adjectives that I came up with. Rude? Yeah. Obnoxious? Yeah. Arrogant? Yeah. Demanding? Yes. We all know the same person. Okay. So, when you're dealing with difficult people, they can demonstrate these traits, yes? And when they demonstrate these traits, we become, perhaps, defensive, loud. We withdraw, perhaps. We maybe become a little bit superior. Well, actually, as a director of studies, I think you're fine. Oh, you want your child to move up a class? What are you basing that on exactly? Yeah. And even if you're not saying that, those of you who went to Nick Kiley's really excellent talk on body language last year, you're conveying this, yeah? So, confused? You're asking what exactly? I'm sorry, you want me to change your entire timetable? Why would that be? No? They are the difficult people, and we are the nice people. It looks like we're doing the same thing. Now, it's very interesting when we talk about dealing with difficult people because, and I'm completely culpable of this, what I see happening with myself and with what's happening in this room is the whole thing becomes immediately externalized. Yeah? As in, that person is difficult. Now, because we all work in IH schools, none of us have difficult members of staff. But if we did, or maybe with a previous employer we have had, those people, I've got a teacher in my mind. Yeah? Can you put a teacher in your mind?
About 30.
About 30. Okay, so when the transfer system comes around, you know where not to apply to, right? When you have that teacher in mind, do you think of this sort of thing? Do you think of them as this? Yeah? And do you think of your behaviour as this? Or do you think of your behaviour as calm, rational, trying to find a middle ground, fair, firm but fair? It would be quite interesting to consider how that person views you. And I think it's particularly interesting for teacher managers because a long-held contention of mine is that one thing a director of studies needs, which I have never seen on any job description ever, is a good memory. And why do you need a good memory? Apart from to remember the promises you've made to people, you need a good memory because you need to remember what it's like to be a teacher. And there's something that can often happen is when you cross from the staff room to the DOS office, that you forget the behaviours that annoyed you when you were a teacher. You forget the expectations you have of your management when you're a teacher. And one thing I think we all forget, and it might be a blessing, you forget that teachers talk to other teachers. Like teachers forget that students talk to other students. Yeah? So teachers forget your students talk to each other. Your students all know each other because they're all local. Yeah? And the moms talk to each other because the power of the playground is massive. Equally, your teachers talk to each other. So even if you have 10 teachers with whom your relationship is lovely and one with whom it's slightly iffy, don't think only that one teacher knows about it. Would you like to pause for a little frisson of horror here? Okay. So with these two behaviour patterns, we enter something called, and apologies to all my North American cousins, but I feel I can only say this term in a cod American accent. We enter what is often called the cycle of conflict. Da 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 da. Okay. This is the cycle of conflict. It's actually, in my view, it's more the zigzag of conflict, right? They come, they are rude, so we become defensive, so they become obnoxious, so we become loud, so they become arrogant, so we withdraw, so they demand, so we get superior, and at the end we're both really confused. Yeah? Now this can happen very quickly. Yeah? Very, very quickly. And once you start down this slalom to hell, yeah, it's very hard to pull out of it, I think. And one thing that to me can start the cycle of conflict is that we start interactions with a set of assumptions. Yeah? Now, think of the teacher that's in your head. I'm seeing my teacher now. If that teacher came into my office, what did I hear in my head? I heard a little voice going, brace, brace. Adopt the brace position. Because this person is not coming in saying, I love your jumper. Or, I'm so happy with my timetable. So immediately, that person's coming, what are we doing? If we're honest, what are we doing? You see, you have these interactions with clients, with HR managers, with parents, But those interactions are often more scheduled ones, or you know what's happening, there's some backstory. So that question of, are you prepared for the conversation, I would argue with clients, yeah, or end users, generally you have some element of preparation, but conversations with those you manage, you often don't have that preparation. And I often have the image in my mind, and a phrase I often use is, even if I'm prepared for the conversation, I've learnt Macbeth and they've come in with a script for King Lear. It's never going to meet. Do you know what I mean? My starting point is always so wrong. I think I know what they're going to talk about, and I've marshalled my defences accordingly. That means in the first minute of that conversation, I'm not properly listening to that person. I can't be, because I'm waiting to go, is this a dagger I see before me? Because I've got the script of Macbeth. The fact that they're shouting how thankless, more thankless than a serpent's tooth it is to have an ungrateful child, I'm just waiting for them to come back onto my script. So I think this is very interesting. There's a lot of research and writing, and you can find this on the web, talking about active listening. And I'm sure everybody in this room would say, yes, I strongly agree with listening actively, etc., etc. But if I'm honest, I think that quite often, and George Pickering, who many of you know, has a nice quote for this. He says, don't make the unfortunate management mistake of thinking that the opposite of talking is waiting to speak. Yes, so, maybe we can think about that a little. Once we're in this cycle of conflict, what happens? Because if this is with someone you manage, or someone you live with possibly, it's not a one-off thing, is it? The implications are very wide. So possibly this can define our relationship with them. Once it starts, it almost has to be like that. Huh? They might tell others that we're difficult. That's what I mean about teachers talk to teachers. And even though we might think we've been really clear and fair, they might not. This is not to do with people not getting what they want. This is to do with how people perceive the interaction that led to them not getting what they want. Yeah? There are times when, the outcome is almost irrelevant, really. We might resent them. I actually started to quite strongly resent this particular teacher. I could not see much positive in her. Our family, we used to have a saying that said, if I saw her socks on a washing line, I'd get cross. That was me. I didn't even have to see her. Just the thought of her was enough for me. So you can imagine that for me, doing something that, was referenced in an earlier session today, giving positive feedback to this teacher was very gritted. Your students are really happy, brackets, personally, I wonder why, given that you're such an awful person. So we might resent them. And this quote, if you think of, do you have staff members that perhaps you resent? You feel negative towards, And this quote is a great quote, I think. It doesn't get me very far. And here's another quote, which perhaps is less flip. Yeah. So really, if we have a problem with that teacher, we can't solve that problem from that place. Yeah? We have to find another place. Now, of course, the problem is duo-created, isn't it? you know, like me, probably all of you are calm individuals, angelic to work with, cooperative, never argumentative, never contradict anyone. Of course we're like that, and they are not. You know? If we're managing, really it's our responsibility to pull the game up a little bit. You've had a lot of time here talking about demand high and upgrading and asking more. As a manager, I think we consistently need to do this of ourselves. Yeah, demand high is not something that's confined to a classroom. It's confined to a way of being and interacting with your colleagues. Yeah? So we have to find another way to deal with these things and this person. And we have to look at these difficult conversations and think, how can I manage these better? And it's not about how can I get them to agree with me. And I think that's where I've often gone wrong in the past, is, you know, that there's part of you that thinks, what is wrong with you? You just agree with me. Because I'm clearly right. Just agree with me. And it will all be so much easier. But of course, the other person is sitting there thinking, why can't you see? You know, why can't you see? I don't want to teach that Saturday morning as kids' class. A, because I don't want to teach Saturday morning. B, because my own kids have got activities and I've got to get through. Why can't you see the problem you've just thrown at me? So this is quite interesting. There's a quote by a writer called Neil Glass, whom I like a lot, which is talking about change management, where he says, inevitably, individuals view change through the filter of their own personal anxieties. And managers implement change from a position of logic and facts, and then spend a lot of time thinking that their staff are just too thick to understand, basically. But what you've got is a factual approach versus an emotional response. Yeah? And we'll look at this a little bit more in a minute. I want to put up what I consider to be some golden rules when you're having a difficult conversation. And I want you to look at them, and with the person next to you, discuss very briefly if you agree or you don't agree, or you think this one has no place, or that's wrong. Yeah? Just discuss your reactions to them. Okay. These golden rules were originally conceived in terms of helping people to say no. Because I think no matter what Sir Elton John says, no is the hardest word. And I think a lot of us find it very hard to say no in a relatively constructive way. And if we have a relationship with a staff member that's developed in the way that I indicated mine has, our saying no is actually fuel to the fire of that problem relationship, rather than being something that's just a fact. So I'd like to go through these and get some of your reactions to them, please, because I think there was quite a lot to say. Yes? Okay, don't apologise. Any reactions to this? Did this surprise you?
If you've done something wrong, then I think you should.
Yeah.
If you think you've done something wrong, then you should put your hand up and say that I'm sorry. But I think what I tend to do is probably apologise for not having done something wrong. Because I feel it's a difficult situation. I'm trying to meet people halfway, and I think that's a strategy, but it's not really.
Actually, I started off doing the same thing. It was one of my teachers actually turned around and said, "Stop apologising for everything." Because it's basically telling the messages, telling the teachers that if I'm apologising for something, they probably should be complaining about it. You know, I mean, they can't get where they're going.
Yeah. I think another thing about apologising is it can, if you were to have a staff member like this, it can almost indicate there's a chink in your armour, or there's a way to get you to change your mind. If you feel that terrible about it, you know, if I batter on, if I am that rude, obnoxious, manipulative person, I'll get what I want. Yeah? I do agree with Justin that if you've done something wrong, you have to put your hands up and say, yes, I'm sorry. My own tendency, I think, is to say, yeah, I know you haven't got the timetable you want, I'm sorry, but. And then explain. Well, I'm sorry, but an awful lot. And then the I'm sorry is almost completely pointless. We might as well say banana, but, you know, or, you know, phatic phrase, but. Yeah, because it's meaningless, because you're not apologizing. You're trying to say, you know, yeah, feel bad for me, but you know what? You still got that Saturday morning class whether you like it or not. So I think you've got to be very selective about apologizing. Yeah?
I think you can apologise for the disharmony, can't you?
Yeah.
You know, that you are sorry that you're actually falling out, and that is true.
Yes.
You're not telling a lie. That is unfortunate.
That's true.
You can be.
There are phrases that you can use which show that you empathise without actually apologising. There's a kind of tendency in our company to immediately just say, oh, it's not, the reason it's not my fault is this. I try to, the timetabling department gets blamed for everything.
Yeah.
And it's usually not their fault. And so I try to encourage them not to explain why it's not their fault, but to say things like, I'm very sorry you've been put in this position.
Exactly.
Whilst I haven't admitted, well, I haven't said it's my fault, you've at least maybe made the other person feel a bit better.
I think that's really important. I think it's helpful to say, I'm sorry you feel angry about this. Yeah? Or, I'm sorry you didn't get the timetable you requested. Because in a perfect world, I would like to give you that. You know, I would like everybody to be happy all the time. But I'm sorry you've been put in this position, or that is a sort of recognition of your difficult situation without saying, and I've caused this. Yeah? Okay, what about forget about the padding? Do you know what I mean by this? Yeah.
Well, it depends on who you're talking to. We were talking about the fact that there are certain members within the geographic United Kingdom that don't want padding. And there are others who almost insist on it.
Can you explain padding?
What I mean by padding is if you come with a request which I can't comply with, and I say things like, oh, look, you know, if I could help you, I would, you know, I'd do anything I could, but it's really difficult at the moment because of this. I mean, I can see that it's horrible for you, and I feel bad. You think you feel bad, blimey, you should be in my shoes. I feel awful. But however, saying all that and leaving that aside with the best will in the world, no. Yeah? Now, it's a clever person that can peel all that, because they don't hear the no. They don't hear the no. I had a really interesting experience many years ago when I ran a teacher training course in Budapest, and the convention there was that you gave the end of course grades face to face. Something, let me tell you, after that encounter, I never did again. And I had a teacher on the course who had a very high staff room reputation, was very well regarded by her peers, but was unable to satisfy many of the SALTA criteria. So when she came in and said, thank you for coming, hope you've enjoyed the course, and I'm happy to tell you you've completed the course with a grade pass. Thank you. And she still sat there, and I said, so thank you. And she looked at me and said, well, go on, tell me. And I said, tell you what? She said, tell me my grade. And I said, you've completed the course with a grade pass. She said, no, what's my grade? Because she could only hear pass A. She couldn't hear anything else, and I had to say about 4 or 5 times before she could actually hear it. So often people, particularly if you pad, they can't hear what you're actually saying. It softens the message, yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to say, I think the padding makes a big deal out of it as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I agree, Estelle. It can make something that's actually can be quite straightforward into some huge deal. And then, you know, where do you find yourselves, ladies and gentlemen? You find yourselves in the cycle of conflict. Okay. Don't explain. I think this is a very contentious one. So can we have some thoughts on this? Yeah.
For me, for where I work, I always explain with CCQs.
Yeah. And does that work in your context?
99% of the time,
Yeah.
if I ask the CCQs.
Yeah. Because you have to tailor to your context, of course. But why do you think I put this here as a golden rule?
Maybe it allows people time to complain or challenge you.
Yeah, I think it does, Jenny. I think it does. It allows people time to formulate rebuttals to your explanation, because remember the fact versus feeling dichotomy. Your explanation is unlikely to be anything other than factual, if you think about it. Yeah? And people's response is likely to be very emotional. Very general here, but pretty much. So I don't care if it makes your life difficult. I don't care if you can't find another teacher at such short notice. I don't care if you want me to teach this class rather than that class. I don't care. I just know I don't want that class. Which bit, as they would say, do you not understand? So all the facts in the world, while they might be important to contextualize, yeah? And I'm not saying if somebody comes into your office and says, can you change my timetable so I don't have to teach this class? You go, no, I can't. Next! No, obviously, you would give some kind of framework, but it can't necessarily open up a dialogue unless you say, look, I can't comply with you on this. Yeah? But there are obviously bigger issues here that we need to talk about. Can we fix a time when we can talk about those? Because I think they're important to you. Yeah?
Would you not come back to the bottom line that you are contracted to work 25 hours, you're only on a 20 hours at the moment, therefore, if that's sense of explaining, is that not worth saying?
Yeah, if that's the situation. If I'm up against it with a teacher, yeah, then I would say, look,
Come back to the facts.
yeah, your contract is 25 hours, your hours down 5, I've got a 5-hour class, that class needs a teacher, no one else is hours down 5. Yeah? Yeah, Steve.
By not explaining, you're perhaps missing the opportunity to find a solution. So if you're saying, but I can't find another teacher for Saturday, and the teacher says, but Frida can do Saturday, you miss the opportunity if you haven't explained.
Yeah, that's true too. So you've got to be careful, haven't you? Because the things you're talking about are the teacher says something and you explain to that, rather than a big explanation surrounding your original thing. You're absolutely right, because they might say, look, she's desperate for hours. Yeah, she'll do it. Oh, I didn't know that. That's really useful. Thank you. Yeah, but I think if you start with a big explanation, I used to work for a director who would have termly meetings in a cinema and would start these with all these PowerPoint slides and graphs and charts of sales and this and that, and what course we're going to open, possible new branch, etc., etc., etc. And often the message was, so there won't be a pay rise this year. Now, all of this, and it wasn't you, Steve, and all of that explanation, yeah, I didn't care about any of that. I just cared about that one piece of message. Okay, concentrate on the core phrase. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this. It's called the broken record technique. Yeah? You've got to think what your core phrase is. I would suggest no is not a good core phrase. Yeah? But I would suggest a core phrase would be something like, you're 5 hours down and we have a 5-hour class. Yes, I appreciate that, but you're hours down and we have a 5-hour class. I see that this is difficult for you, but you are hours down and we have a 5-hour class. Yeah? Those of you who have teenage children may also like to take this on. Didn't work for me, might work for you. It's surprisingly powerful if it's delivered neutrally. And one of the problems with the cycle of conflict is that it removes any neutrality from the situation, and it almost becomes a personal battle between you and that individual. We're not in a playground, are we? Yeah? And we have to remember that, because it's very easy to get sucked in. Have a fallback position in mind if you choose to. Yeah? Because you have your desired result and you have your plan B result, like your best result and your least worse result, if you like. So there may be some room to conciliate. You've all been to Nick's talk, or you've all watched the video. If you haven't, you should. So you should be aware of your body language. Be careful. It's not only the classic stuff of don't fold your arms, but it's your whole body language, which gets into what I call a slightly jumper twisting. Yeah, but you know, you can slip into this very easily if you're not careful. Last one, don't hang around. Any responses to that? Thank you. I have a meeting in reception, I'm sorry. Yeah. When it's over, it's over.
Yeah, maybe also, well, when dealing with difficult teenagers, one of the things is you tell them, I expect you to get on with your work, and you walk away and allow them a bit of time to pout and sulk.
Yeah.
And I think you need to allow other people that time as well. So you don't want to see it.
That's right. And also, and you need it as well, and they don't want to see it. But also, I think when you're in this kind of altercation, almost everybody's a difficult teenager if you're not careful. Yeah. And I'm not including in this talk, but you might like to read and consider, if you haven't already, the work of Eric Byrne when he talks about transactional analysis. I'm sure you're all familiar with this. And he talks about 3 different ego states, which are parent, adult, and child. And how if you behave with a parental perspective, people often respond from a child ego state. Or if you behave as a child, they may behave as another child. Or they may decide to adopt a parental ego state and parent you. And of course, your dream team is adult to adult. So not only do you have to be aware of your own style of interaction, you have to be aware of others' preferred styles and think, am I slipping here? Yeah, so that's quite interesting. I mean, the main message for me is when it's over, it's over. You know, you gain nothing from flogging a dead horse. Yeah? Okay, we had some very useful training in IH London last week, and we actually had a session on dealing with difficult people, which I went to see if there was anything I wanted to nick / research for this session. And there are 2 useful things which I wanted to bring from that session, which was from a training company called Gordon Yates. And there were colleagues here who were at that session, can have a little nap now, but they were very good, weren't they? And they talked about these communication styles, and you can look up Thomas Kilmann online. There's a lot about it. And I may have to refer to my notes here because I haven't fully internalized this myself yet. As I say, it's very new. This is, of course, a matrix. I often think that if matrices and circles with arrows were made illegal, all management training would collapse. If it's not a matrix or a circle, it has no validity. And Thomas Kilmann defined the climb from assertive to non-assertive and uncooperative to cooperative, as you can see here. And there are the styles as signified: competing, avoiding, accommodating, collaborating, and compromising. Okay, and I want to look at each of these very briefly for you, and this is where I have to have my notes. The first one is accommodating, which is seeking to satisfy the other person's concerns or needs at the expense of one's own. Now, in your position, you have to think, are these the expense of the organizational needs, not your personal needs? Now, they say that there are times when accommodating is correct. So excuse me if I read from my handout from them here. You need to accommodate when you realize that you're wrong. I'll put this out up on the website with the slides and everything for the conference talks. You don't have to take notes on this. you sometimes accommodate when you need to build up credits, what I sometimes call brownie points with someone else. So you'll give in because it gives you a card to play at a later date. Yeah? Of course, your interactions would never be that cynical. When it's more important to preserve harmony and avoid disruption. Yeah? Size of staff room is a big feature in how you manage your staff in your school. And sometimes the effect of what I've always called toxic teacher can be very, very powerful, particularly if you have a small staff room, because it can't dilute that person as easily as a larger staff room can. But sometimes you might have to accommodate just to stop the staff getting really upset. There are other times when you cannot accommodate because your staff cannot get the feeling that you always accommodate to that one person. The teacher I had in my mind at the beginning, I used to dread giving timetables to this teacher. I used to dread it. It's what they call in Glasgow a truly bum-clenching experience for me. I was so worried by it. And so I was very appeasing and and I did all the stuff I'm telling you not to do because that's what you do. And I had another very accommodating colleague that would, so flexible, so helpful. You have these teachers? And this teacher once said to me, I'll do whatever I can, and I'll help out, and I don't mind changing shifts, but just sometimes I'd like to think you put as much trouble into telling me my timetable as I can see you do with her. And that was a real wake-up call for me, because I thought, do you know what? I think with teachers that didn't give me any trouble, got so much less of my effort than teachers that I knew were a problem. When I was teaching and I had a class, if I had a difficult student, sometimes I would always plan my lessons for that student to keep them happy, and the rest could go to hell in a handcart, providing this one wasn't, going back and forth with me. And I think sometimes it's the same with our staff. If we know a staff member's problematic, we give them a lot more of our head time than the ones that don't give us any trouble. Yeah? So accommodating is an interesting one. Sometimes you accommodate, even when you know what people want to do is wrong, because they need to make mistakes to learn as part of that team. So it's a conscious decision on your part. If you're managing a team and they want to make a team decision that you, with your experience, can say, whoa, whoa, whoa. Sometimes you just have to let them do it so they can get to that point and think, Yeah? Obviously, of course, you then took them and say, well, I could have told you. Yeah? The next one is avoiding. Many of my colleagues in IH London, when we looked at this one, there were many mutterings of, blimey, I do that an awful lot. Yeah? It's uncooperative and it's unassertive or non-assertive. Now, you avoid an issue if the issue's trivial. Yeah? If it's not important, you can avoid it. When the potential damage outweighs any benefit, all right, just let it go. You can avoid it when others can resolve it better. Yeah? So if there's a problem in your staff room with a teacher having problems with a particular class, maybe you can help with that, but maybe it's better that you buddy her with a more experienced teacher, because they can help with it better than you can. Yeah? But we often avoid... We don't really identify what the problem is. And that can often mean if you avoid, then later on you feel very aggrieved or you feel resentful at the outcome. And remember the quote about resentment. because you don't actually bring your issue to the table in a non-threatening way. You just think, oh, well, you know, it's only me, it doesn't matter. And then later on you wander around going, nobody cares what I think. I might as well be talking to the wall for all the attention people pay to me, but you've never actually said it. You know? Sometimes you can avoid when the issue is symptomatic of a more fundamental issue. Yeah? So you might avoid tackling why one teacher hogs the photocopier to focus with that teacher on the issue of lesson planning and how they're working and how they're planning their time. Yeah? Rather than saying, I want to talk to you about the amount of photocopies you use, and by the way, can we also talk about your planning? Because that's clear. You know, forget that one. That's not important. This is important. Compromising. This isn't a dirty word. Yeah? It's intermediate, it's mid-assertive, and it's mid-cooperative. The key word here, of course, is partial. And sometimes, to be truthful, partial is as good as it's going to get. Yeah? Compromising is helpful when the goals are moderately important, what does it say here, but not worth the effort of potential disruption. So you might decide to compromise. When you need to find a temporary solution, often we compromise as a quick fix, yeah? Which is fine. But if your quick fix becomes your status quo, then it's not fine. Yeah? And when you need a sort of, a temporary settlement, really. They talk about collaborating, which is high on assertion and high on cooperation. This is your dream team, I guess. And this is where we would all like to be. Now, the point about these communication styles, as I understand it, is that we need to recognize our preferred communication style and understand the preferred communication style of the person we're talking to, which takes us back to the basic mantra for any academic manager, which is you've got to know your staff. Yeah? If you're collaborating, it's the opposite of avoiding. Yeah? So nothing's not on the table, really. And you often have to take this approach when you have to merge different viewpoints, which might be conflicting, but equally important to all parties. And sometimes working through the process of reaching consensus makes everybody feel very important. Yeah? I mean, there's another discussion to be had, I think, about consultation versus reaching consensus. Because consulting your staff does not necessarily mean that you reach a consensus that everybody agrees on. It can be that you take their views on board and the decision may be yours or it may be your director's. Okay, and finally, competing, which is high on assertion and high on lack of cooperation. That's basically using whatever is possible to win. Now, you might see this and think, oh, you know, thank God I never do that. But in the wee small hours of the morning when you can't sleep, you might like to think about conversations you've had and think, actually, did I want to win in that conversation? Was the most important thing for me to get what I wanted? And did I get it? Yeah? So these are quite interesting models of communication style, and I recommend you have a look at Thomas Kilmann and what he's saying, and I also recommend that if you're interested, you look at this parent-adult-child paradigm if you're not familiar with it. A lot of people have a lot of questions about transactional analysis and Eric Burns' theories and the positions he takes, which is why I didn't want to bring them here. A lot of people dismiss it as sort of old hippie stuff. Which, as an old hippie, I'd just like to say. You know, we often don't explore how we convey our messages. We're so focused on the message, we don't explore how we convey them. But we know that what we take is more what is not said than what is said. I think there was a statistic about this in their talk, wasn't it? Something like 10% is the message and 80% is the body language. Was that it, Joe?
Roughly, I think it was 75 body, 10% the message, and 5% or something was the intonation.
Yeah, so, yeah, 5% was the intonation and words, yeah? 10% was the actual message, and the rest was the body language, and I put in that the way you communicate, yeah? So you know those T-shirts that used to be very popular with kids that said, I see your lips moving, but all I hear is blah, blah, blah? I think that's quite often what's happening, yeah? These trainers suggested to us this 3F principle, which again is Taylor and Lester, you can look it up. And it's looking at when you're conveying a difficult message to follow these steps, which I think most of us would say we do, but I think they bear revisiting. They would say that you can use them in any sequence, but this is the sequence that they find works best. So the first step of facts is a factual description. Yeah? You always arrive late for your classes. Yeah? You don't complete your register. You don't complete your work done sheet. Yeah? You never come to TD sessions. Yeah? The feelings section, let me just be sure I get this right, and how you feel about this. Yeah? You don't complete your work done sheet. I feel frustrated then because if you call in sick, I've got nothing to tell the standby teacher. In future, I'd like you to complete your work done sheet. Yeah? And it's 3 very simple steps. Now, those of us who are trainers, and we're all involved in training in one way or another, would say, well, this is very familiar to us from observation feedback, perhaps, except we would say the students feel, or I perceive the students felt. So in future, this step, I think as managers, I think we're a bit bad in this middle bit, actually. I think we either pour liters of stuff into this middle bit, or we don't mention it at all. So we have the facts and what we want people to do, but we don't actually tackle what this fact causes in me or in other people. Yeah? Now, our job is not to be therapists at all, but part of our job as a manager is to identify how certain behaviours make us feel. Yeah? And because we are managers, does not invalidate our feelings at all. Yeah? So this model we found was one, well, I say we, the people I was talking to after this training session, we found was one that we first looked at and thought, yeah, you know, old hat, we know that. But when we started to think about it, and then some of us have been doing a bit more reading, a bit more research, well, actually, you know, I'm not sure if I do this very well. I think a lot of us, and I hold my hands up here, mix up the facts and the feelings. Yeah, so we'll start off by saying, okay, you know, there have been some complaints about this particular class. Now, I know it's really difficult. We'll put a lot of emotional stuff in very early on rather than saying, there have been some complaints about the class. The complaints focused on the lack of practice students are getting. Yeah? Now, I'm confused about this because in your classes here, I don't see that. So I'm wondering what's happening in that company class. That's not. So this is where you're opening the door to dialogue, perhaps, but at the end, there has to be a so in future. Can we? Will you? Can I? Yeah? Might this be useful for you? Okay. I'm 5 minutes over what I should have been, but 5 minutes less than I could have been. It's a kind of happy medium there. Anything anybody wants to bring before we go for lunch?
Can I just say, Maureen, I wonder if there's a point where you're talking, because in the DOS relationship, it's difficult to be adult-adult because inevitably you are the parent, so to speak, parent of an adult. Yes, you're adults, but you've got the authority there. So I just wonder if there's a room for dealing with unprofessional people. Maybe that's what we're saying. They're not difficult, but they're not understanding the demands of the job, they're not inherently difficult, but they're not getting what is asked of them.
I would say that's still them being in a child state. And I think our instinct as DOSes very often is to be paternal, maternal, which is positive or negative depending what you bring to your perception of that adjective. I don't think it's impossible. I think you must be adult. The managers for whom I have most respect are the ones who I perceive as always behaving in an adult state. And when they slip, which they do because they're human, I'm always very shocked because that's not my expectation of them at all. When your teachers are being difficult, and go right back to the beginning of this talk and think, what are you understanding and where are you in this paradigm with them? It's very often expressed in a way that is actually coming from a child ego state. Very often, I would say. And our instinct to parentalize that consolidates this as an accepted pattern of behavior. Once you begin to allow this, you send a very strong signal that this is the way to communicate in this organization. And this is my role. Yeah? Now, there's nothing wrong if you have someone in your office in tears. There's nothing wrong with going, oh, you poor thing, don't cry, I'm really sorry you're upset. But that's not me as a mum doing that. That's me as one person to another person saying, I'm really sorry you're upset. Don't cry. Pull yourself together. but you can't let her stay as a child. Yeah? You can't. And it's a very long road with some people, and I suspect for my managers, a very long road with me, because I see I can lapse into that very easily to pull me into this adult state, which is, I would say, the most respectful way to work. Okay. Yes? Thank you. Yes?
I've got hopefully a very quick question. I fully agree with everything you say, as usual. And particularly the fact that you should always be very neutral in your way of delivering a message. And never mind how rude the person is, to always be, polite and the same with everybody. And in that way, then you can, as you say, get the result that you want and resolve the issues. So I'm not really worried about resolving the issues. Where there is a conflict, I think, is that the person is still upsetting me. Even though I've resolved the issue, even though I've been really professional, I am still dreading seeing this person. And she or he may be behaving in a way which is really not healthy. They're being rude, they're being defensive, they're being argumentative. And I don't know if maybe this has to be dealt with. Because it's not acceptable to be constantly rude, argumentative. So I don't know what your take is on this. Do you just resolve the issue and just think, well, this person is rude, but my aim is to resolve the issue? Or actually deal with the person and say, look, these are the issues and we're dealing with those, but there is another major issue, which is the way you are communicating with me.
I think I agree with you, Estelle, but I think one thing at one time and one thing at another time.
The question is, obviously you would deal with it separately.
Yeah, but I think you must.
To deal with actual communication style.
Yes, I think you must. I think you must. I think it's disrespectful to the other person to not be frank about this type of behaviour. And I think by not addressing it, you allow a type of behaviour to develop in that person which you might not allow in other people, or other people wouldn't allow in themselves, but they see X getting away with it. You know, why can't they then? Well, clearly, I had a colleague who got terribly, terribly upset about something in a discussion with her manager, but got what she wanted. And then a colleague about a month or so, overheard this at the photocopier, a colleague a month or so later, who was a model of professional behaviour, was going to this same manager to ask for something difficult and said, oh, so-and-so, just tell me what's the best way to deal with this, because I heard from you, you know, a few tears and a bit of a sniff and you get what you want. And I thought, oh, that's how it goes, is it? So you have to address it, because otherwise you're not being even-handed with your staff either, are you? You're saying to everybody else, you behave in this way and you know, lie on the floor and kick your feet and you'll get what you want. So yes, you have to. Yeah? But I think you have to, and that's where this 3F thing is quite useful, because, you know, they can't say to you, if you say, I feel very intimidated when you behave like that, nobody can say to you, no, you don't. I'm a pussycat, no, you don't feel intimidated. I feel like this. You know, and I acknowledge I own my feelings. Now, and this is the effect you're having on me or you're having on your colleagues. Yeah? Okay, I think it's time to stop for lunch. Yes? Thank you very much.